Oh, wait. Oh. This is what I'm dealing with. I've probably used the word excited way too much in this video, but that's genuinely how I feel about all those books. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today is a very rainy, gloomy Saturday, and so it feels like the perfect day to talk about books. If you're new here, my name is Kat and I make videos about books, writing, some travel vlogs, and also about other random things living rent-free in my neurodivergent brain. I have already mentioned quite a few times on my channel that I'm trying to curb my book buying habit because I already have quite a big collection that's only part of it. And I have more books on my physical TBR alone that I'm able to read. And so in order to avoid accumulating more books that I can read, I want to reduce the number of books that I'm buying, which is going to be very hard because I think reading and book buying are two different hobbies and I love them both. Another reason I want to slow down when it comes to book buying is for a few personal reasons, but the gist of it is that I need to pay a bit more attention to my finances and I want to save a bit more money or at least reduce my spending. And one of my biggest areas of spending in terms of non-essentials is books. So this is where I can make a difference for my finances in 2025. As a result, this is likely going to be my last book haul for a long while. I have close to 30 books to show you today, and they all came my way between the months of September to November. I'm doing a no book buying month in December to kickstart my good habits for 2025. Without further ado, let's diving into the books. In November, I was hosting an event called Neurovember, encouraging people to read more about neurodivergence, how the brain and the mind works. In that spirit, I got a few books for the event. I don't got to read them all this time, but I'm really looking forward to. So the first one I already talked about quite a bit on my channel is Empire of Normality by Robert Chapman. And this is a book talking about how this idea of a normal mind or normal brain is influenced by capitalism and how we need to take a Marxist approach or a Marxist lens to criticize this establishment of a neuro norm, could we say. I'm currently reading this and I'm finding it quite interesting, so I'll probably talk about it a little bit more in my December wrap-up. Next, we have The Cure for Burnout by Emily Ballesteros. And this one is all about burnout, which is something I've been struggling with for quite some time now. So I'm very interested in reading this and hopefully finding some help and some tools that are going to help me deal with it better and hopefully get completely out of it. Next, we have Neurodiversity, The Birth of an Idea by J.D. Singer. This is a very, very tiny book and it's her thesis, I think probably master thesis, but I'm not entirely sure. And it's basically the piece of research that led to creating the term neurodiversity. So I'm quite interested in reading this seminal work. Moving on to some books I got during my travels in November. This is a tiny book I got during a weekend I spent with my sister in Toulouse. I think that was in October. And there's this big bookshop in Toulouse, which is called Ombre Blanche. Depending on which entrance you take, it turns into a bit of a rabbit hole. Like you have a tiny, tiny hallway and then you arrive in another room and then you have another room and then another room. It's quite an interesting bookshop. It's quite famous in the area as well. And so I was visiting it with my sister and I decided to pick up this book, which is Cartographie et littérature by Laurence Daran-Gaïda. And this is a French little essay about cartography and literature, as you can probably guess, because the words are not too different from English. I have a fascination for maps, and so I'm quite intrigued to read something about the intersection of maps and the process of creating maps and literature. Then we have this little tiny edition of The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, which I got from Livraria Lello when I was in Portugal, in Porto. It is like a tiny, beautiful edition that is made by the bookshop itself. It's self-proclaimed as the most beautiful bookshop in the world, and I can attest that it was absolutely gorgeous. You can see some footage from a previous vlog that I published on my channel. After Porto, I got extremely lucky to also get to visit Milan in Italy, which I absolutely loved. I will have a vlog coming of that trip. It's not up yet, but I also picked up a few books while I was there. So the first one is The Mind's Eye by Oliver Sacks, which I read in November for the November event, and you can hear my thoughts about it in my November reading wrap-up. I also picked up The Power of Language, Multilingualism, Self and Society by Viorica Marian. I'm very interested in languages. I love learning languages and learning about languages. So it's hard for me to resist a book about languages. And so I caved in and picked up this one, which is gonna join a few others in my collection. And then while in Milan, I also picked up Short Stories in Italian by Ollie Richards. This is a language learning book with short stories, vocabulary. I have this desire in me to learn Italian. It's been going on since, I think, last year. I've started dabbling in it a little bit via Duolingo, but I didn't get very far. And so I'm hoping in 2025 to maybe take it a bit more seriously. And so while in Italy, I couldn't not buy a book to help me learn Italian. So that's the one I picked. Next, I have a whole pile for when I was back in Toulouse with my husband from coming back to Milan. In Toulouse, apart from that huge, amazing bookshop that I talked about with a lot of different rooms, there is also a chain where you get a blend of new books, but also secondhand. And I don't have many opportunities to find secondhand books in my area. There are a few, but they're not necessarily all super accessible. They don't have a big selection. So I was very excited to spend some time there and look at what they had in terms of secondhand books. And I only picked things that were already on my TBR, trying to be reasonable. But obviously, as you've seen from the pile, I still found quite a few books that I was excited about. So let's talk about them. They still all have the little stickers that I need to take out. But the first one I picked is The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the third book in the Shattered Hearth trilogy. The first one is the 5th season, I think. And I really, really want to read this series. I've heard so many good things about it. I watched N.K. Jemisin's course on masterclass about writing fantasy fiction, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm quite confident that I will enjoy the series. And so when I found this book, like the third tom in the series, I already have the first one. I couldn't let it go. I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna seize the opportunity and I need to find the second one at some point. Also read the first one, but I'm glad that I got this one at quite a nice price. Next we have Wool by Hugh Howey, and this is a recommendation from a very good friend of mine. She talked very highly about this book. I think there's going to be a movie or series adaptation. I don't know a lot about the plot. My understanding is that people are living in a big silo kind of structure because something bad happened on Earth and it's not really habitable anymore. And so if you do not follow the rules of the silo, then you are casted out and then you need to survive outside, which I don't know how it's looking, but probably not very good. So I don't know much about it, but I'm very curious to read this book because it's one of my friend's favorites. Then I found Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. I'm very excited about this one. I was hoping to find it when I was in Porto, but I didn't. And so it was a good bonus that I found it secondhand in Toulouse. I wanted to read that potentially for November, but didn't get to it. I already had quite a few books on my TBR, but I'm quite intrigued by this one. It's apparently following a main character who is struggling with her mental health, and my understanding is that at some point in the book she is seeking a diagnosis for some kind of neurodivergence, although it's never named exactly which form. And so I'm quite interested to read about her experience seeking diagnosis. I know that Ellen from the Ellen May Book Club started this book and was not head over heels for it. So we will see what I think, but I'm still quite curious to read it and see if I enjoy it more. Then I found We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler. And this is a book that has been recommended to me years ago by a former colleague. And so I don't remember exactly what the plot is about exactly, but it is centered around kind of a sibling relationship, which I find very interesting. But I think I remember what the big twist is because my colleague told me. I'm still quite curious to see what this is about and how it's pulled off. So we'll see. I can't share much about this book yet, but I'm intrigued to read it at some point. I also found God Killer by Hannah Kenner. I've seen this book a lot over BookTube. The reviews seem quite positive. I was not intending to read it at first. I'm not necessarily very drawn to super hyped books a lot of the time. What caught my attention with this one, though, is that apparently the main character has a limb difference. I think she is an amputee missing a leg. Rochelle from Good Morning Dreamer talked quite highly about the disability and limb difference representation in this book. So that is what caught my eye and what made me curious to read it. So when I found it again on secondhand for a very good price, I leaped at the opportunity. The next book I picked up is a translation from the Swedish. It's called The Daughters of the Bear Hunter, would be the literal translation of the title in English. And it's from Anneli Jordal and translated by Anna Gibson. It's the story of 7 sisters who are living in the woods with their father, who is a bear hunter. Except one day their father doesn't come home. And so we are following their efforts to survive in this wild forest and the difficulties that they encounter. I love those kind of stories. I love a good story set in a forest. And I'm interested to read more Swedish literature as well. This is probably too advanced for me to read in Swedish, so I was quite happy to find the French translation. Next, this is another translation from the Swedish. This is Celui qui a vu la forêt grandir, so it would be something like The One Who Saw the Forest Grow in English, and it's been written by Lina Nordqvist and translated from the Swedish by Marina Heid. This book is constructed around 2 timelines. The first one unfolds at the end of the 19th century, and we're following a main character who has to flee from Norway, her birth country, to move to Sweden because she's been practicing abortions and it's not well regarded at the time, so she has to leave her country and find refuge in Sweden. The second timeline is from the 1970s, and it's about 2 widows facing each other in that same house years and years later, and there's apparently a family secret that they are unfolding. It sounds very mysterious, very intriguing, but also I like how it's centered around women and family dynamics. So I'm curious to read this. It sounds very intriguing. Then we have a third and I think the final French translation. This is from Erbjørg Wassmo, which is a very famous Norwegian author that I've read a few books from and really enjoyed them. So when I saw this and saw that she had released a new one, I was very excited. This is Mon Autre, so that would be My Other, and it's translated from Norwegian about Françoise Heid. I honestly have no idea what this is about, but just the name of the author is enough for me to want to pick it up. Finally, from the same bookshop, this one is not a second-hand book, but I could not resist. This is Nous by Christelle Dabos, so that would translate as We. And it's a fantasy novel. I know nothing about the plot, but it's from the same author as the Mirror Visitor series, which I absolutely adored. I reread A Winter's Promise very recently and enjoyed it so much. So I was quite happy to see that she had released a new book, and I'm very, very curious to read it and see what it's about. I think the plot was quite obscure, so I don't really know what it's going to be about. It's apparently a dystopia, and the edition is very pretty as well. So we will see what this turned out to be. The final book that I picked up in Toulouse is Paideia by Claire Garand. I had never heard of this book. I spotted it in a shop front and it immediately intrigued me because the word paideia is, I believe, from the Greek, and it's a word that I've heard in my studies. I didn't really remember what it meant, but somehow it had stuck in my mind. And so the title intrigued me. I came closer to look at the book and then was quite intrigued by the cover. So I went inside the bookshop and seeked it out. It's a kind of sci-fi novel. It's a debut from a French author. I think sci-fi and fantasy is not very developed in France, so it's always kind of exciting to see a new author in those genres. And apparently we are following 10 little girls in orbit around the planet, and they are supposed to be the future of humanity, like the future bearers of children. And so I don't know a lot about the plot, but it seems quite dystopian, quite feminist as well. So I'm very intrigued and very eager to pick this up very soon. The next pile is kind of early Christmas presents. So thanks to his job, my husband got a very nice gift card that we could use on cultural products. So obviously books is the first thing that come to mind for me. And we decided this year to split the gift card between the two of us, not to give each other gifts other than the one book we will exchange for our Christmas book flood event at the end of the year. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should watch this video. So he used his part of the gift card to get something for his painting hobby, and I got a bunch of books. The first one is How Kyoto Breaks Your Heart by Florentina Liao. This is a friendship story, or rather the heartbreak that ending friendships can cause, and it's set in Kyoto. So I love Japan, and I'm always very interested about the topic of friendship, especially female friendships. So the combination of both was a winning combination for me, and I'm very intrigued to read this. It's a fairly short book, more kind of contemporary literary fiction, and so I'm hoping to get to it fairly quickly as well. Next, I picked up The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor, and this is a sci-fi novel about a scientist going to an island to study a weird new species, which apparently might be alien and has the form of an octopus. That's pretty much all I know, and I'm hooked. I think octopuses are fascinating, and so a sci-fi book centered around octopuses, yes, please sign me up. I want to read this. Next, I got Pod by Layleen Paul. If you watch my November wrap-up, you will know that I read The Bees by the same author in November and thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a dystopian sci-fi novel set in a beehive, which was quite unique and nothing like I've ever read before. This one is set among a pod of dolphins. I think one of the dolphins has a kind of disability, and I'm just so intrigued to read it. I think it's going to be fascinating, and if it's as good as The Bees, it's going to be a fantastic read. So I'm very looking forward to this. I also picked up Dragon Fruit by Makia Lucier, and I don't know a lot about the story. I know there is something around a dragon egg that might grant you a wish. I think it also has representation from the Pacific Islands. I've heard that there's some degree of tattoo magic in this book, and I have this project to one day write a book around tattoo magic. So I want to read something like this. I'm very curious and very intrigued, and yeah, the cover looks stunning as well, so that's only a bonus. The next one, I think, is a classic in the fantasy genre. It's Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I have never read this. I have never read a book by Leigh Bardugo, but she is quite a household name in fantasy at this point, so I think it is high time for me to read this. It's also a high story, which sounds quite fun. I'm currently reading Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, which he also talks about in terms of being a heist story, and I'm quite enjoying this. So I'm curious to see another take on the heist in a fantasy setting, and I got this beautiful edition, so how could I resist, honestly? I might do a buddy read of this with Mary from the Oni Reads channel, and I'm super pumped about that. We'll see when that happens in the year, but I'm very excited about it. Then I got Orbital by Samantha Harvey, which won the Booker Prize this year. I have this on my TBR for December. It's a very thin book about astronauts in a spacecraft contemplating the beauty of planet Earth and reflecting on life and all those kind of things. It seems to be quite a meditative book, but apparently the writing is really gorgeous. And it's also a pick from Christian Jones' book club for the month of December. So the theme in itself was enough for me to be excited about it and wanting to read it. But I'm also quite curious about the prose and also to participate in the book club. Okay, the final book I got with my Christmas gift card is In Good Hands by Alice Farnham, and this is a nonfiction about music conductors. And I know nothing about this, but I'm getting more interested about music. I don't know, the topic felt fascinating to me. I saw this in a bookshop in a train station in London, and I didn't pick it up at the time, but it really caught my attention. I'm very curious to read this and to learn more about what conducting is like and understanding a bit more about the world of professional music. I have 3 more books that are a bit random, so they're in their own like separate category. The first one, if you've watched my channel for a little while, you've seen me unbox it. It's The Phoenix Keeper by S.A. MacLean. And it's a fantasy novel set in a zoo. There is some romance in there. There are mystical creatures and phoenixes, and that's enough. The book is gorgeous. I got it from Illumicrate. Apparently there is some neurodivergence representation as well from some of the main characters, so only very, very good arguments to get me to read it. Then I got The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. This was gifted to me by my work because I was part of a committee in charge of organizing our last staff retreat. I work for an organization that is fully remote, and so we get together roughly twice a year. It's a whole lot of work, and as a thank you, I got this book, which I really appreciated, and it's all about how we meet and why it matters. Finally, the last book I got is Laziness Does Not Exist by Devon Price. It's from the same author as Unmasking Autism, which I'm planning to read in December as well. So for someone who's been struggling with burnout for quite a bit, this title sounded quite intriguing, and I think I have a lot to unlearn and heal about the hustle culture, this constant requirement for productivity, and acknowledging that you can't be productive all the time and that rest is not the opposite of being productive. Like, you need rest to be able to be productive. So I think this book might be very useful for me, hopefully healing to some degree as well. We will see. I've heard only good things about Unmasking Autism, so I'm expecting this book to be as good quality as well. And there you have it. Those were all the books that joined my bookshelves between the month of September and November. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Oh, that's so satisfying.